Hi, this is Rabbi Orlofsky, and welcome to the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Whether you're watching with our friends over at Torah Anytime, or wherever you watch or listen to your podcast, as always, we're happy to have you along for our pre-Rosh Hashanah show. Coming to the end of our 6th year, and I am going to reiterate what I've said a number of times. I decided to call it the Rabbi Orlofsky Show, because if you go to one of the early episodes, and I just got an email from someone who told me they just discovered the podcast and they started going through. So one of my more popular ones was a rant that I had called It's a Show, Not a Shear, because I talk about whatever I want. And it's not only a straightforward shear. Yeah. You may recall that when my son Yaakov took over for the Purim episode, he called it It's a Shear, Not a Show. And it was anything but. But, so we're going to talk about some other things as we get ready for Rosh Hashanah. But we start with a sponsorship. And for our Rosh Hashanah podcast, we have a special sponsorship sponsored by Shawn Karp, CPA. A dear friend. We only go back to when he was in 8th grade, so back into the early 1980s. The Yahrtzeit of Tzvi Meir ben Rabbi Yehuda, Harold Schechter on the 24th of Elul, and Yissochur ben Mordechai Yosef HaKohain, Barry Hochdorf, 23 Elul. This is, of course, my good friends, Shawn and Karp, and I had the schus of knowing both of these outstanding people. They of course, they used to do the Pesach in the Granite, and I had my parents used to go there, and I was the scholar in residence a number of years, and it should be an aliyah for their Nishmas, and the fact that they have such wonderful children like Shawn and Sipar is mamish something they know. I know they can look down in Shemayim with a tremendous amount of happiness and pride. It's almost Rosh Hashanah. I have pointed this out in the past, that I don't always remember what I say, especially in past podcasts. And I gave my little introduction at the beginning that this is a show, not a shear, because, every now and then I get an email which says, how come we don't give recipes anymore? And I think that's important. Yeah. So I'm going to give you a few Rosh Hashanah recipes. We're going to go mechol l'kodesh, I hope. But let's start off with, the food is very important in Judaism. It's one of the things that we use as a means. We'll talk about that later when we get to the question and answers. But food is get a very important role to play. What we eat and how we do it. As we all know from Yitzchak, he said he thought it was Esav, it was really Yaakov. Well, actually, he told Esav, and then Yaakov showed up. But he says, prepare me matamim, and then I'll give you a bracha. Because you get a different bracha after you've had something to eat, And that's why, a guy once was making a kiddush for a daughter, and he says, the whole purpose of the kiddush is that people give you a bracha. So why don't I just call everybody up and say I had a daughter, and they'll all give me a bracha. No, don't have to make a kiddush. And I said, because you get a different bracha when you give somebody something to eat. So I'm going to share with you a few recipes for Rosh Hashanah. Those of you who are not interested in this stuff can just tune out. But on the other hand, as I hear from people from time to time, and I'm tremendously flattered when I hear this, they say, I could listen to you read the phone book. And by the way, we're going to be doing that in a few podcasts. So if those of you who still remember what a phone book is. I heard this comedian. He says, anybody remember 411, or in Israel 144, where you'd call up for information, and they say city and state, and they say business residence, and you give it to them, they give you the phone number. He goes, is anybody still doing that? He says, I feel like if you call up 411, they would go, really? So I'd like the number of all of the Chinese restaurants within a mile of my location. Okay, where are you? You tell me. But anyway, so let's start off. If you're going to make the simanim, apple. cut it into pieces. That's very easy. Ramon, cut it into pieces. If you want to be more proactive, you can actually take the little seeds out. I talked about this some years ago, how whenever I do, I get the juice everywhere. And someone said to me, so do it in a little pan of water. To which my son says to me, but then all the juice goes into the water, and it's not such a good thing. There is some sort of a patent, some kind of little thing they have where you like bang on it and it all comes out, etc. I say just, suck it up and, you just put on an apron if you're really nervous, you know what I mean, and just go for it. And then you could give everybody some Ramon seeds. It's much good. Tamarim, cut them in half. Check them. Right? Cut them in half, check them. Give everybody a half. If you're cheap, give everybody a quarter. It works just as fine. And if you're going to use tamarim, so most people just use the dried ones. If you're going to use the fresh ones, it's a little counterintuitive. Don't use them mamish fresh when they're yellow. You have to leave them out till they start to get brown, because otherwise they're like impossible to eat. What do you do with the leek? We stick the leek in the soup, and then we take out and give everybody a piece of leek. Other people cut them up. I know some people make them into a leek kugel. There's different ways of doing it. But we just drop it in the soup. Gourd, kara. Now, some people use other types of squash. Then you can be much more creative. We use that big, gigantic, ugly green squash that they sell. And I cut it up into cubes, and I put it into a pot with a lot of sugar, and I let it boil until it's soft, and that's it. It's really very simple. Beets, I peel them, wear little baggies, and preferably a thing, because it's going to get all over you. Yeah. And slice them very thin and put them in a pot with water and a lot of sugar, and just keep boiling them until they're soft. Then and the water gets more like caramelized, like starts to get thick as into a syrup. And that's called candied beets. And they're very yummy. Very yummy. People say, why don't we make them during the year? I tried it once. Nobody ate it. Fish head. Just drop it in your pot with the rest of your gefilte fish, and then put it out and let everybody enjoy themselves. That's about it. I assume there must be something more creative to do with fish heads. I really don't know. Because on the plane, one of my guilty pleasures is I watched this TV show called Chopped. And one time they had top people there, so they made it as hard as possible. And so they had to make an appetizer out of chicken feet. Most people have never even seen chicken feet. My grandmother used to add it to the chicken soup because it helps it to get thicker. So chicken feet have that advantage to it. That's the throat chicken feet. But you had to make a dish out of it. And I know 2 people lost points because they forgot to remove the toenails. Always keep that in mind if you serve chicken feet. So I don't know if there's a more creative thing to do with fish head. I don't really know, but there you have it. Okay, I think that covers our simanim. Yeah, I don't know if I forgot anything there. Except for carrots, and that is, we save that till we make a side dish. And this is what we call my mother's meat tzimis. And I use at least a bag of carrots. Depending on the crowd, I might use 2 bags. And you cut the carrots thin. If you have a good food processor, you don't want them so thin that they're like paper thin, but you want them relatively thin. And chunks, a little small, I would say even chunks. Yeah, and you put them into the pan, and then you put in, depending on your crowd, 1 or 2 packages of flanken, and put a little garlic on it, and then you roast it. And flip them over at some point. My son, when he does it, he puts it on a low heat and cooks it for a very long time. I have no patience for that. I put it at the usual 350 degrees and cook it and turn it over. And when it starts to look like it's done, I take it out and I pour out all of the juice. Now, you could use that juice for something, I don't know what, but, pour out all the juice, and then I pour a liberal amount of honey. I'm using the term liberal, like a lot of honey. And then I put it back in and I cook it so that the honey really soaks in. And sometimes it gets a little too liquidy even then, and I pour off the juice again and I add more honey and cook it some more until it's nice and sweet and caramelized. And that is just delicious. And that's what we do with the carrots, and that is one of our wonderful side dishes. Rosh Hashanah night, I make my sweet chicken. I created this recipe. It's from the Would You Like to Have Diabetes cookbook. I put in, into a pot, most of a bottle of ketchup. And I use Osem instead of Heinz because it's a little sweeter. And then I put in brown sugar. I'm going to make up an amount, a cup. Maybe it's more, maybe it's less. I don't really have an amount. I spritz in a little bit of soy sauce like this. Dun, 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 dun. That's how much soy sauce I use. And I put in a can of pineapple chunks along with the juice. So I open it up and I pour the can in. Yeah, you're getting an idea of my method over here. If I have some fresh maple syrup, I'll add a little maple syrup to it. And then I add Coca-Cola. I don't add Coke Zero because that is NutraSweet. I'd rather use the one with maximum amount of sugar. And I add in, I would say a cup, maybe more like 2 cups. And I bring it to a boil, and I let it cook until it thickens and gets nice and thick. And then you let it cool. And then you make your chicken, roast chicken. Right? Cut up some onions, put the chicken in, garlic, paprika, and bake it for about an hour and a quarter or so. It's not that it's mamish all done, but cooked. You let it cool. You pour off all of the juice, and then you put on the sweet sauce, and I put it back in the oven to let the sweet sauce soak in. People love it. It's love it. I serve it with rice. Put the gravy on the rice. I'm telling you, I feel my sugar going up just discussing this. Now, if you want to make something that's more diabetic friendly, go someplace else. I can't help you. This is how we do it. And for dessert, it's always honey cake. My wife makes the honey cake. I make teglach. Nobody eats it except for me. I grew up with teglach. I love teglach. You can't get it in Israel. Nobody makes it in Israel. If there was one year that the Brooklyn Bakery actually made it, and it's just too hard, so they didn't make it. And I have tried any number of recipes. There is a friend of the show, Jamie Geller, who has a recipe online that I now use. It has become my go-to teglach recipe. And it's the easiest and best that I have been able to find. And basically you make these little honey things out of dough, and then you stack it up with baking cherries in a beehive. If it wasn't Rosh Hashanah, the way I grew up it was with baking cherries and walnuts. But we know not to eat nuts on Rosh Hashanah. But if you decide to make it for Sukkot, make it that, making little beehives. And then you put it on the table and everybody pulls at it, etc. And it's not so good. So what I did instead is I would take little muffin tins and make individual teglach in it with little pieces and baking cherries, and then you pour the sauce over it. I love it. I'm about the only one who eats it, but it's Rosh Hashanah dik. Anyway, all right, you got some recipes going in. It's a 3-day yontif, so get started. Get started already. Okay, that's the little bit of mundane preparation for Rosh Hashanah. Now we move to a much more serious aspect of Rosh Hashanah. Yom Adin, put on my gold tie for Rosh Hashanah. Yeah. As you know, gold represents din. Kesef represents Rachamim, silver. But anyway, gold is seen as red and yellow. It's not just straight yellow, it's red and yellow. That's why I made gold. And that's why the Gemara in Baba Basra says that the sun appears red at night, at dawn, and at sunrise and at sunset, as it's down on the horizon. And the rest of the time, we describe it as yellow. He says, really, you can't see it clearly because it's so bright and you can't really tell. But so and someone wrote me a very hard question, and it's a question that I have grappled with myself. I'll give a background to the question. I came home and I had a really good Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. I thought it was a really good Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. I felt I davened well. I felt that I had more kavanah than I usually do. And I came home and I remember I said to my wife, Matzah Yom Kippur, I said, it's going to be a good year. And then COVID hit. And many, many, many people died. It was like, boy, did you miss that one, When Harry Truman was elected president, he was carrying the headline that the papers came out saying, Dewey wins. That was a famous picture because all the polls said that Dewey was going to win, and he didn't. Truman won. But people thought it was just sure. They were just sure, The Jewish press, I don't know if it's still true, but they used to advertise the largest Anglo-Jewish newspaper in the world. I don't know if it's still true or not, but that used to be their masthead. And in 1973, the Yom Kippur War, of course, broke out just before Yom Kippur. And when the Sukkot edition came out, the headline read, Israel wins. Yeah, that was quite an overstatement. Not much different than Samuel Clemens, who's better known as Mark Twain. After a newspaper printed his obituary, wrote a letter to the editor saying, reports of my death have been highly exaggerated. Israel wins. They were nowhere near winning. And many lives were lost. And terrible things took place until we actually, I don't even know if you could describe it having won. It ended in a ceasefire. But afterwards, the paper said, well, we had to go to print because of, Sukkot, and, we didn't really have time to wait. And we just assumed that, Israel would be victorious based on its past wars, right? Suez War in 56 lasted 3 days. The Yom Kippur War lasted 6 days. And we figured certainly here by Sukkot, everything should be wrapped up. It, of course, was not the case. So here I come back and I tell my wife it's going to be a great year. And it turned out not to be so good. Last year, a lot of people davened, and they probably felt like it was a good davening. Israel was doing pretty well. Things were looking pretty good. And then, as we know, what happened on Shmini Atzeres? Here in Eretz Yisrael, we were dancing, celebrating Simchas Torah. And the sirens went off. And I'm here in Yerushalayim. And people looked out in the mirpaset and they see the missiles exploding all over the place. And the reports started to come in of the terrible massacre that took place. And here it is on Shmini Atzeres, and you're thinking to yourself, this is the end of the Yemei Adin. You have all of Elul, and then you have Rosh Hashanah, and then you have Yisseres Mei Tshuva, and then you have Yom Kippur, and you have the 4 days from Yom Kippur to Sukkot, where we're getting ready for Sukkot, and these are days which are, the Chazal saying, you don't even have time to do a chet. You're so pure for after Yom Kippur and going into Sukkot. Then you have all of Sukkot, which is still part of the Yemei Adin. They still keep up the white parochas. Yeah, and sure. And then you come to Hoshana Rabbah, the final Yom Adin, and then you go into Shmini Atzeres to celebrate. everything, the whole conclusion of the entire, Yom Narayim period. And it ends the way it ends. Somebody said to me, it's like one by one, all of our Yom Tovim are being taken away from us. You come to Lag BaOmer and you think of the terrible tragedy that happened to Maron and the people who died and were trampled to death. You come to Shmini Atzeres, Simchas Torah, and you think of the terrible tragedy that took place and all the people lost lives and the people are still being held hostage to this day. What's happening? How do you look at this? And more important than that is, it sure seems like our judgment is off. So what the person wrote me is, how am I supposed to go into Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur now, knowing how things ended last year? And I think that's a profound question. And it teaches us a lot of things. A lot of things you have to reflect on this. The first one is, take Nissan Tokef seriously. Mi ba'esh, mi ba'mayim. Yeah. Mi b'rash, mi b'magefa. Mi yachya, mi yamus. Mi b'kitzo, mi lo b'kitzoi. Mi yani, mi yasher. You look at these things and you think, wow, this is for real. And you have to understand that what happened on Shmini Atzeres was decided on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. Devastating. And when you see all the people who died from COVID, and a lot of Yidden, a lot of Choshev people, that was decided on that Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. So the Yom Adin is a serious thing. There's a reason why throughout history people treated Rosh Hashanah and Yomim Norayim, the days of awe. I grew up in a family that was not Shomer Shabbos. We went to a conservative synagogue. But Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, the place was packed. Jews who didn't keep Shabbos, Jews who may not have had anything else, understood on an internal level, but this is Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. This is serious. This people still felt a connection to. And a lot of people came to Shawn, and almost nobody enjoyed it. But they came because they sensed that this was something important. It was very strange. I went to a conservative synagogue, and because it was so crowded, I remember reading an article once that conservative synagogues, they have to figure out how to build a shul that can accommodate everybody who comes on Rosh Hashanah and Kippur, and then not look so empty the rest of the year. So they usually have folding doors that close off part of the sanctuary for a regular Shabbos, and then they open them up on Yom Kippur and go all the way back into the social hall and fill it up with chairs. But there was such a demand that they wouldn't let you in unless you had a ticket to show that you bought. I went to the East Meadow Jewish Center, and East Meadow did not have an Arov. On Yom Kippur, you have to carry your card if you want to get into shul. I mean, how crazy a situation does it have to be, So the mamish make me Chal Shabbos if I want to go in and daven. My father used to tell a joke, an old Jewish joke, where this kid comes to shul and wants to tell his father something, and the guy at the door says, "You need a ticket." He says, "No, I'm just going to tell my father something. I'm not staying. I just have to give him a message." He says, "Okay, but don't let me catch you davening." So it would go in. And then there was another strange thing about this synagogue that I went to, and that is that they use microphones, and they broadcast it into the bathroom. I guess in the bathroom you could follow the service. I was never sure what to do when, you're using the facilities and they're saying Kedusha. A little unsure what to do over there. But, everybody understood on some sort of a basic level that this was And people cried. They took this very seriously. They understood. World War I started on September 1st. And it started with the bombing of Warsaw. The Nazis were bombing Warsaw. Can you imagine what that Rosh Hashanah was going into the World War I? The Satmar Rebbe was on a Kastner transport. I've heard this story from people who were actually there. They took him out of Hungary, and they were supposed to be going to Switzerland. But in the meantime, they kept him in Auschwitz, or Birkenau, one of the two. They gave him separate barracks where they stayed in, and they davened. The Satmar Rebbe led the davening for Rosh Hashanah and Birkenau. It gives you a certain sense of immediacy. So we need to understand that this is a very serious time, and we should not take this lightly. We should understand what we're dealing with over here. That this is Yom Hadin, mi yichya u'mi yamus, who is going to live and who is going to die. And there are stories of people, big people, who come out Yom Kippur and they say, "This is my last year." They just knew. That this is, when we say we open the books of life and death, this is not to be taken lightly. And if this past year has taught us anything, it's taught us of how serious it is. Half the country has been evacuated from the north. It's unbelievable. Bombs are falling in Tel Aviv from the Houthis in Yemen. Well, the devastation that we're suffering is beyond belief. Just beyond belief what's going on. From the north, from the Shtachim, from Gaza, from Iraq, from Iran. Was that Iraq also? The Houthis sent a missile from Iraq. It's and the year before, things were looking pretty good, So we have to go into Rosh Hashanah and we have to take this seriously. And we have to know that this is about us. We take responsibility. We're the ones who are judging ourselves. We have to, this is between us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Gemara says on Rosh Hashanah, everybody passes before HaKadosh Baruch Hu, B'nei Maron. And Rashi brings, the Gemara Rosh Hashanah brings three pshatim. It either means like the army of David HaMelech that marched single file, or it means B'nai Maron is B'nai Charon, which was this mountain pass where only one person could pass through it at a time. Or B'nai Maron are sheep, where when you count the sheep, you open up a little opening in the gate and each one walks single file. What do all three of them have in common? You walk in alone. It is you and God. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is looking at you and giving you his full attention and saying, you are Adam Reshaim. Are you the reason I created this world? Are you deserving for the world to exist? And it seems like an astounding concept. The Chazal say, Bishvili nivra ha'olam. The world was created for me. And a lot of people don't appreciate this, what that means. I mentioned a few podcasts ago about taking responsibility, and I talked about the Planters Peanuts. So someone said to me, there was a Peanuts cartoon that said the same thing that you said. So made the shtel from Peanuts to Peanuts. But in Peanuts, Lucy, is talking to Linus. And Linus says, everybody was put into this world to make people happy. Lucy thinks about it and she makes that little fist and says, there are a lot of people out there not doing their job. Because I look at the world of what are you doing for li bishvili li neva ha'olam. I'm the center of the universe. We went away for a couple of days to a hotel with my family, and I was at davening, and nobody wanted to get up and daven. And my father, who was nifter close to 30 years ago, I spent a whole year davening, and I felt like since I had to afflict myself on the public, in return, if there's ever a situation where they need somebody to daven, I'll daven, unless they don't want me to, you know. I was at a mincha once where nobody wanted to get up and daven. So finally I got up and I started davening. Now I have, among the many problems that I've discussed in the past, I have a little problem with my back. So I sometimes put my hands behind my back just to hold myself up. Anyway, I'm saying Ashrei, and I have my hands behind my back, and this old man starts yelling at me and saying, that's the way you daven, your hands behind your back. What is this? Took my sitter, went back to my seat. You know, and some people started yelling at him, and he started yelling back. And so eventually, somebody went up, I guess, who didn't keep their hands behind their back, and it was more acceptable to him. But, you know, unless people give me a hard time. Anyway, someone says, will someone go up there? I said, okay. I went up and I davened. And I was by Birchas Kriyashma, and a fellow comes over to me, and he says, slow down. You know, some people came late. You have to give them time to catch up. I just paused for a second, and then I just continued doing what I was doing. But I found the statement so amazing. You want to hold up the entire tzibor who came on time and are davening? For what? Because you came late? Bishvili nivra olam, the entire world exists only for me. I remember thinking immediately, this is how the person understands Bishvili nivra olam. The entire tzibor should wait for me, because the world exists for me. For years, emceed an event here in Har Nof, a men's Shmiras Haloshen. I have emceed the women's English Shmiras Haloshen in B'nai Umah, where we get about 3,000 women. We did this event, and we had some of the top people in the world speaking. I mean, really, very, very choshev people. Tzvi Koshelevsky came one year. The Rosh Hashiva, Asher Rubenstein, the Shiva of Torah Simcha, Zatzal, he was there. We had really an amazing cast of people. And every year it was Rabbi Leff. It was Rabbi Leff and somebody else. So I don't know today. I haven't read comics in decades, obviously. But there used to be two comics. One was called World's Finest, and one was called Brave and Bold. And in the World's Finest, Superman used to team up with somebody. And in Brave and Bold, Batman would team up with somebody. And those different ones. So Lahavdil was Rabbi Leff and other Chashuva people. It was always Rabbi Leff. Anyway, we finally stopped it because we were getting such a small turnout. I understand why. Because Rabbi Leff, one of the first years, the tagline was, Shmiras Haloshen is not just for women. So he says, of course, because the women didn't listen to the Meraglim. That's why when the women show up at these Shmiras Haloshen events, it's because they know it was essentially the men's fault, so they don't mind coming. But men are not in such a rush to show up. They messed up with the Meraglim. I could understand that, But so we would be waiting, and mamish, the turnout was embarrassing. I can't think of another word. And so I would ask Rabbi Leff, I'd say, should we wait, a little bit to see if more people come? And he said something to me that made such an impression on me that I've tried to integrate. And he said, if you start late, you penalize the people who came on time. And I thought, wow, that was amazing. And therefore, I will start whatever the time is. And people say, maybe we should wait. And I say, then it's not fair to everybody who showed up. Rabbi Left told me, and I think he's right. And start. I mean, it was a little ridiculous when I was at Karp Tuni. Karp Tuni is a Hasidic Chizik organization. A lot of the speakers speak in Yiddish. I was one of the few who spoke in English. And when they put out the ad, I was one of the only ones not wearing a strimal, I should point out. It was one other. But, most of the other people spoke in Yiddish, you know. But I remember when I got there, this one of the speakers came over to me and said, you should know, Rabbi Orlofsky, I'm going to make a suggestion that you don't say your usual things. I said, why is that? Because I've been saying them for years and people think you stole it from me. Anyway, my talk was supposed to begin and I came into a room and there was nobody. And I just started, good evening. Yeah, good Shabbos, it's a pleasure to have everybody here, isn't it? And I just started talking. And one by one, people started walking in and looking around. They couldn't believe that I started with nobody, you know. Rabbi Jeremiah Wahlberg, soll sein gesund und stark, who founded Olav Shalom in Merrick. When I say he founded, I mean he really built it. It existed, obviously, because they hired him. And davening was called for 9 o'clock. Nobody was there at 9 o'clock except for him. And he got up to the bima and started davening. And people didn't really start showing up until he was in, Birchas Kriya Shema. But so people said to him, why don't you wait till people come? He says, because then nobody will take this place seriously. And eventually, of course, people started taking it seriously and they showed up on time because they understood that if you don't come on time, and you're going to miss out, And there's tremendous power to that. But here the person's telling me, don't worry about everybody who came on time and are in the middle of davening. Stop so that I have a chance to catch up. That's not what Bishvili Nivra Olam means. Bishvili Nivra Olam is basically the concept that was expressed in the classic book, Horace Hears a Who. And in this, Horace the elephant, who had been in an earlier Dr. Seuss book, he has this little dandelion, and his hearing is such that he can hear that there's an entire land that lives on side of this dandelion called Whoville, and he can hear everything that's going on there. And the other animals cannot, and so they want to take the dandelion and throw it into a fire and get rid of it because they decided that Horace lost his mind, I guess from all that time sitting on the nest. But he's trying to protect them, and he says, you guys are going to have to make enough noise that they can hear you. And everyone in Whoville is screaming and yelling and blowing, trumpets, doing whatever they can, except this one little kid. And they finally say, listen, this is life or death. You have to add your voice. He goes, I'm just a little small voice. And he adds his little voice, and that's enough for people to be able to hear it. Bishvili Nivra Olam means that you have a responsibility to look at the world and say, I'm responsible for the world. I can decide what's going to happen. And I've said this many times. Yeah. The Yissochur doesn't want to get you to do Averas. That's small fry stuff. He's the busiest malach out there. And Gemara says that he is the Yissochur, he is the Satan, and he's the Malach HaMavis. As the Yissochur, he tempts you. As the Satan, he accuses you. And as the Malach HaMavis, he carries out the sentence. He doesn't have time to get you to eat a ham sandwich. What he wants to do is make you feel like you don't matter. Because if you think you don't matter, then you can do whatever you want. Because he knows that if you daven and if you work, you have the power to heal the sick. You have the power to give children to the childless. You have the power to find shidduchim for those who are single, to give parnasa to the poor, and yes, to defeat Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran and all of their proxies and the Houthis and everything. You can do it. Bishvili nivra olam, I have a responsibility to the entire world. So that should be our kavanah going into Rosh Hashanah. And maybe we'll be successful and things will turn out the way we want, and maybe not. But we cannot shirk our responsibility, because we are the little whose voice will make a difference in whatever takes place in the world. And there's another thing to take into account. When I had my heart attack and my bypass operation, it took me a while to recover. I don't know if I've ever fully recovered, but anyway, it was before Rosh Hashanah. And I see somebody, and he says, so, what do you want for this coming year? And I said, well, just a better year than this year. And he said to me, you ingrate. You told me that 2 of the doctors said that you were supposed to have died, and the Kosh Baruch Hu miraculously kept you alive, and all you can do is complain? I said, you're right. I want a year just like this year. Meaning, you can look at the fact that you had a heart attack and a bypass, or you can look at the fact that the Kosh Baruch Hu miraculously kept you alive. What is it that you choose to focus on? And I've spoken about this in the past. I'm always amazed the feedback that I've gotten over the years since I pointed this out. And I've mentioned it on the podcast a number of times, and I wrote it when I used to have a column in the Hamodia, and I've spoken about it in Shiurim, and I have gotten feedback over the years from people who told me, for 20 years I'm still doing it, what you suggested, and it changed my life. We've established already I have ADD, so my focus is not so good. So what I'm telling you is probably more appropriate in Modim, but I do it right at the beginning, because you have to have kavanah in the first bracha. So I want to make sure that I at least keep tuned in over there. When I come to the words, Gomel chasadim tovim, he bestows loving kindness, I say, like what? And I think of something that Hashem has done for me, and I don't repeat. Now, when I say I don't repeat, that means that if I had a flight where there was an empty seat next to me, I'll think about that in Gomel Chasadim Tovim. If I have another flight where I have an empty seat next to me, I'll say it again, because it was another chesed. But I won't repeat the first time that I had an empty seat next to me. Although there might be multiple layers to it, right? So that, I'm happy that I had the extra room. And then I might thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the fact that I was able to bring down my food tray and not have it squeezed into my stomach. And I was able to use the food tray of the empty seat next to me. And I might focus on the fact that my personal item, I was able to put under that other seat instead of in my seat. So there's different layers of chasodim that go into that particular chesed, that there was an empty seat next to me. Yeah. But, I try not to repeat. And I say, Gomel chasodim tovim, and I think about it. And then I say, V'konei akol. And it all comes from Hashem. 3 times a day, over the course of a year, that's over 1,000 chasadim that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has done for you. It changes it so much when people say, why does Hashem do so many bad things to me? And I say, he does so many good things to you, but you ignore those. Or even worse, you take credit for it. And if you gave HaKadosh Baruch Hu credit for all the good things, then you'd realize he doesn't do so many bad things to you. So I've been practicing this for years, and I tell you, sometimes I find the chesed in the bad thing that happened. So I got into a car accident, but I was uninjured. And I might in Gomel Chasadim Tovim say, Baruch Hashem, I wasn't injured, even though my car got smashed up and I have to go through the whole insurance, everything like that. But that was good, right? In other words, you can, like this person said to me, you can look at the fact that you had a heart attack and you had a bypass, etc. You can look at the fact that you were able to stay alive. My son Yaakov, at my mother's funeral, I'm one of 6 boys, and she said, if your mother had died 50 years ago, only 2 of the brothers would still be alive, because 4 of you had bypass operations, and they didn't have that 50 years ago, right? Somebody came to visit me in the hospital, an old friend of mine, David Wilner. We were in LA together. And he said to me, my grandfather would have a heart attack. I'd put him in the hospital, rest a little bit, and send him home, have another heart attack. And eventually, he had a heart attack and he died. There was nothing you could do if you had a blockage. That was it. Just had a bunch of heart attacks and you died. And you were able to have an operation where they're able to bypass the artery and get blood to your heart. It's an unbelievable thing. So it all depends on what it is you're choosing to focus on. So although this past year has been terrible, it could have been worse. It is a mystery, because the original plan eventually apparently was that when Hamas came in, Hezbollah was supposed to send their rocket attacks against us, and their rockets are much larger and more powerful, and also make incursions because they also have tunnels. And there was supposed to be an uprising in the West Bank. So all 3 of these things would have happened at once, and wow. Well, I don't know how we would have recovered from that. And the fact that Hezbollah didn't come in is an unbelievable thing. It's unbelievable. So when you look at how terrible things are, they could definitely have been worse. And so we go into Rosh Hashanah and we say, listen, the HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Yasi Asreni Ka V'Lamavas Lo Nisanani, as David HaMelech says. I may have suffered, but I'm not dead. I'm still alive. And that would have been such devastation. I don't know what we would have done in that kind of situation. And so we go into Rosh Hashanah and we daven that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should have mercy on his people. And we understand the seriousness of the day. We know how serious this time is and what's at stake. And Amir Hashem, all of us will do the best that we can, but keep your spirits up. If you get depressed, you don't help anybody. You gotta be strong. And you gotta say, I can help to change the situation. I might not be the most powerful guy in the world, but I can be that little who in Whoville who adds his voice and pushes, hopefully, Klal Yisrael over the 50%, so that we are zoicha to have an emes ksiva chasima tova. And now we come to the question and answer portion of our program. And we have a sponsor for the question and answer this week. The question and answer is sponsored by Teenspace. Teenspace is a new hotline for teenage girls and their mothers, which provides kosher and fun entertainment and inspiration. Almost makes me wish I was a teenage girl. We have top-of-the-line content like Mrs. Yehudis Kormornick, author of The Last Slave, Mrs. Dena Akerman, published illustrator, Mrs. Miriam Swerdlov, Mrs. Chana Appel, medical clown, and more. We have Mrs. Tanya Rosen from Nutrition by Tanya, Mrs. Leah Rabashkin, Rabbi Shalom Tenla from Star K coming on, and tons more. Call today in the U.S. at 518-988-1364, and in Israel at 074-745-0817. For information and sponsorship opportunities, contact us at teenspaceline@gmail.com. Okay. So if you are a teenage girl, or would like to be, Yeah, maybe you should check this out. I used to remember the Barbizon School of Modeling. They would say that. That was their commercial. Would you like to be a model or just look like one? Okay, here are our questions by Mordechai R. How should we understand the mitzvah to hate Reshaim, Arpikosim, and the like? How is that Darachecha Darchei Noam? Your ways are ways of pleasantness. O Avei Hashem Sinu Ra. Those who love Hashem hate evil. And the Gemara tells the story of Meir and Bruria, where there were these bad people who were accosting Rabbi Meir and causing him a lot of trouble, and he was going to daven that they die. And his wife Bruria said to him, doesn't the pasuk say, Yitamu chatayim min haaretz u'reshaim od einam? Yitamu chatayim, let sins end, and there'll be no more Reshaim. It doesn't say Chotim should die. It says Chatayim should die. You should daven that they do tshuva. He davened that they do tshuva, and they did. So the answer is we don't hate Reshaim and Apikursim and the like. We hate their actions, and we daven every day for them to be able to come back into the Jewish fold. And don't hate the sinner, hate the sin. By Yaakov Lieberman, if our goal in life is not to have Gashmias, why are there so many Segulos for Ashirus? I'm not sure what you mean when you say our goal in life is not to have Gashmias. Of course we're supposed to have Gashmias. Otherwise, you're going to have a very hard time in this world since you have a physical body, and your physical body needs to bathe and to eat and to sleep, yeah, and many other physical things that go along with it. Of course you need Gashmias. It's just we need Gashmias for the right reasons. So I'll tell you a story about my brother Gedalia, who lives in Monsey and is one of my personal heroes. And because we all grew up in the same house, and some of us managed to evolve and some of us did not. My brother Gedalia is an inspiration. So he told me the following story. He went to a Gateways Shabbaton, and he got to shul a little late. So he says normally when he goes to a shul, he always sits up front because the talkers tend to sit in the back, and he finds it very disruptive. And he says, but he came a little late. There weren't any spots up front, and he sat towards the back. And during Kriyas Torah, these two guys kept talking. So he says, could you please stop talking? I can't hear the laning. And they said, oh, I'm sorry. Okay. And a few minutes later, they started talking again. And my brother said to them, you know, you come to a Gateway Shabbaton because you want to get inspired and find deeper meaning and grow in your Yiras Shamayim. Why would you talk during davening? And they said, okay, you're right. And a few minutes later, they start again. He says, so I started to get upset. Now, when Orlofsky gets upset, historically, this is never good. When I was born, we were already not talking to most of my family members, like, you know, the extended family. So he said, I got upset. And I said, and he says, I looked at him and I said, I'm a HaKohain. And I give you a bracha that in the schus of not talking for the rest of davening, Hashem should give you a very large parnosa this year. And they stopped talking. And at the end of davening, one of them came over and said, you think all I care about is money? To which I would have said, well, obviously it was the only way I could get you to shut up. But my brother, who's a much better person than me, said, no, but I knew that a person like you would know what to do with the money that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives them. What would you do if you got $1 billion? Have you ever thought about it? I have. I've thought about what I could do with $1 billion. Now, most of it would not be spent on me. It wouldn't. My son pointed this out once when we both bought Powerball tickets. And he says, Abba, what's the point? What would you do if you won? You know, it was up to $640 million. What would you do with it? So, okay, you buy all your kids apartments and cars, you know what I mean? Take everybody away for Pesach, you know, fine. What would you do with your money? So I immediately thought, I said, well, I really want to fix up my car. He goes, you see? You don't even say I'm going to buy myself a fancy car. You're going to fix up your Honda. That's your she'ifas. That's how big you think, you know? But I'd be able to start my yeshiva, be able to start my seminary. Maybe I'd make my little community that I've always wanted to make. Get a little shetach and build my own community. And only people that I approve are allowed to move in. It would be a pretty small community, but you know, I'd have things that I'd want to do for Klal Yisrael if I had the money. That's why there's a din of being mechabed and ashir, because we understand that an ashir has the money to be able to help people. And that was the story with Anshel Meir Rothschild. His wagon broke down, and he had to walk to the nearest town to get there for Shabbos. And by then, his fancy clothes were all somewhat dirty and disheveled. And he comes to town. No one knows, of course, that he's Rothschild. They probably wouldn't believe him if he said. And he says, can anyone put me up for Shabbos? And people looked at him and they said, you know, go to the Melamed. The Melamed was the poorest guy in town, you know. So he goes to the Melamed and he goes, well, sure, you know, I'm sure we can find a clean pile of straw for you, or mostly clean anyway, you know. So here's Anshel Meir Rothschild, you know, they set him up a clean pile of straw. And he says, look, you can't go to shul in those clothes. Yeah, I got some clothes for you, you know, so the finest burlap, you know what I mean? So he sets himself up and he goes to shul. And he sees sitting up front is the usher of the community. And they check with him with everything. Who gets an aliyah, who gets this, who gets that, you know. And he's sitting with the Melamed in the back bench, you know, with the poor guys, you know. He's never been there before. It's an experience. And he's not happy with what he's seeing. So the rich guy decided he can have an aliyah. So they say to him, you want a mishaberach? Like, you know, you're supposed to give some money if you have a mishaberach. He goes, sure. He says, how much do you want to, you know, give, you know? So he looks at the usher, he says, I'll give 10 times his net worth. So the whole town was like, wow, insulting the usher, you know? He says, did you remember the name you called up? Anshel Meir? And they're like, Rothschild? And the Melamed faints, you know what I mean? And everyone's in an uproar. Well, after Shabbos, he brings in his accountants and they check out and he sees this guy is bankrupt. He's living on borrowed money. And he gets up in shul and he says, I knew this guy didn't have any money because the Kodesh Baruch Hu gives money to people to do things with for Klal Yisrael. And if you use it for your own covet, then that's not the purpose of money. We ask for Ashirus so that we have the ability to do what needs to be done for Klal Yisrael. We have enough money in Klal Yisrael to solve all of our problems. We just lack the will. Trust me. I don't even have to go to the whole Jewish people, just the frum world. We have enough money to solve all the problems of the yeshivas and tuition problems and all these things. We just don't want to. But we could if Ashirim understood what wealth is for and what to do with it. By Beni Malik, the Pasuk, Mocha Yeh Ha'ois Hazeh appears in Slichas of Erev Yom Kippur. And it's also in the Makas of Orlofsky. Is there a connection? So the Ashton Teretz is a Chveisnisht. I don't really know. But if I had to make up something on the spot, which is exactly what I'm going to do, I would say the following. Mocha Yeh Ha'ois Hazeh. Arov was a very special Makas because as the Ebenezer says, the Jews were affected by the first three Makas, not like everybody else says. It was affected by Dam, Tzvardeya, and Kinam, because it doesn't say anywhere. But when it comes to Arov, it says, I'm going to make a pedus between Eretz Canaan and Eretz Mitzrayim, and the Jews will not be affected by this. And this was the first time that he saw that the Jews were being treated special and Eretz Goshen was being treated special. I said Eretz Canaan, I'm sorry, Eretz Goshen. Eretz Goshen was being treated special. And Paro couldn't believe it. He went out to check it out because he couldn't believe it. The animals don't respect geographical boundaries. Yeah. So just like at that moment, and that's why Rashi goes on and gives a whole different explanation for the Makos, right? Starting after the Arov, because by Kinim they already said this is Etzbe Elokim, so they already recognized the Kodesh Baruch Hu. What was the point of the rest of them? So Arov was there to show that there's a difference between the Jews and the Egyptians. Yom Kippur is when the Kodesh Baruch Hu forgave us. And part of the process was Moshe Rabbeinu said, I want you to not let your Shekhinah dwell in the nations of the world and only be for the Jewish people. And so the ois of Yom Kippur is that HaKodesh Baruch Hu has a special place for Klal Yisrael and watches over us and cares about us more than everybody else, just like we saw by Makas Arov. So I don't know if that's the correct answer, but that's what occurred to me when I saw this question. And that's it for this week. If you want to find out more about the show, you can go to my website, RabbiOrlofsky.com. You can leave a comment. You can ask a question. You can sponsor an episode. You can sponsor a question and answer. You can sign up for one of our online shiurim. And that's it for this week. Until next time, I am David Orlofsky, and this has been the Rabbi Orlofsky Show.
It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Torah and Simcha, ready to go. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Knowledge and wisdom will help you grow. Lots of fun in every episode. And we don't have to rhyme. No, we don't. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show on RabbiOrlofsky.com. Torah, anytime, YouTube and more. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Torah and Simcha, ready to go. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Till next time, till we meet again. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show.